Hello, everyone, and welcome for being here today. I'm Scott O'Malonic, or Scott O, as most people pronounce my last name. I'm a board member of the MIT Enterprise Forum of New York. I'm the current editor-in-chief of Inc. magazine and Inc.com. And I always have to admit to a group like this, I'm a failed entrepreneur. I'm pleased today to welcome Keith Ferrazzi to our event. I first encountered Keith while stuck in a corporate role at the late Time Warner. I didn't actually meet him, we didn't work together, but I knew I wanted to go out on my own, and his book, Never Eat Alone, was something of a revelation to me. That I ultimately failed being out on my own is no reflection on the book or on him. And in fact, I found another one of his books, Leading Without Authority, to be an equal revelation, and I think is useful to people in leadership, in positions of authority, as those who are not. Keith, to briefly touch on his accomplishments, is the former CMO of Deloitte and Starwood, a New York Times bestselling author and entrepreneur himself, successful, unlike me. And
sometimes successful and sometimes not successful.
Well,
so let's be clear.
Honest, okay. And at Ferrazzi, Greenlight, a coach and transformation expert for Fortune 500 companies. In any case, I had the good fortune to finally meet him face to face when I arrived at Inc., and where he's been an inspiration not only to my own leadership team, but the thousands of high growth businesses we talk to every day through outreach and seminars just like this. I'm pleased that along with his associate, John Galvin, he's here today, and hopefully will be an inspiration to you as well. He'll talk about his understanding of how to transform the thinking of your executive team at a time I think we all can agree has never been more necessary. And with that, Keith, over to you.
Scott, thanks so much. And I wanted to just, as I often do, I want to make sure I give you and your institution the appropriate credit. Inc. magazine took me from a Fortune 500 C-suite executive as chief marketing officer at Starwood. And somebody at Inc. reached out to me many, many years ago and said, I understand you've had a lot of success at a very young age. How did you do it? And they ended up writing an article about that, which ultimately bred the book, Never Eat Alone. And so I have my ability to be here for you, with you all, to credit Inc. magazine. So thank you so much. Right. And nobody said it, but I was also an HBS alum. So speaking to my alma mater here, I'm very proud to be back. John is a business partner of mine, and his job is to look terribly animated during this entire time because I need energy and I can't see any of you. So John's job is to be animated and to receive your questions and to interrupt me. So please give John something to do, because John's job is to get your questions and make sure that he pulls those out of you through chat. So use chat and or use the Q&A. I think Gang was going to be moving you more toward Q&A. Let me tell you what I'd like to chat about today. At the peak of the pandemic, I had seen a number of my clients, very large Fortune 500s, as well as some of the unicorns. I had seen them do some extraordinary things. But interestingly enough, I saw pockets of extraordinary in different places. I saw Mary Barra over at General Motors rethinking purpose of mobility in that organization as they are awakening to moving from an organization that is focused on manufacturing and an organization focused on traditional mechanical engineering into being a software firm. And I was really, really inspired by the transformational work that she and her team were doing. At the same time, I look over at seeing some of the things that Eric Yoon at Zoom was doing, or Drew Houston at Dropbox Unicorns, recently or about to go to IPO, and was also deeply inspired. But one of the things I assumed at the time was that in a crisis like this, we would see a lot of extraordinary, but we wouldn't necessarily see it all in one place unless a research initiative gathered it all up and created a methodology from it. So I reached out to Harvard Business School Press, Adi Ignatius, and I asked Adi if he and his team would be interested in supporting the funding along with a number of my clients and my own research institute in an initiative that I called Let's Not Go Back to Work. Let's Go Forward to Work. And since this initiative began, we raised about $2 million of funding from organizations like Salesforce and Dell and Verizon and Anaplan and so many organizations, Ernst & Young and others. And we have accumulated about 2,000 executives in focus groups, both by role and by topic, rethinking and redefining the best practices of the future of work in the perspective of sharing actual things they were doing differently. And what I want to say is this, that 2020 was a year of crisis. And similar to many crises, 9/11 and many others that we have been faced with in our history, we came together. We did extraordinary things. And what we did in this methodology was ask this large group of individuals what they wanted to hold on to and go forward to work with and not go back and crawl out of the rubble into old behavior. And it broke down into two different sections. The first section I'm going to talk to you about is, what did we learn as leaders? What did we learn as teams who were working together to achieve extraordinary outcomes in a crisis? The first thing I have to say, and then the second thing is, how do we apply that as teams? How do we apply it on redefining our business model? How do we apply it to redefining our workforce model? How do we apply it in really questioning and leaning on our purpose as a foundation? So the second part of the research is about the application, and the first part is about teams and leaders and what we learned and what we needed to dial up and what we needed to dial down. And so that's basically the roadmap that I'm going to take you through. And I would say that if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a leader in a large organization, or if you're an aspiring leader, this still applies. Because the model is this. I call it a model of radical adaptability. What happens in a crisis is the need to be radically adaptable. And in fact, the new book that will be coming out, published by Harvard, is Competing in the New Work World: How Radical Adaptability Separates the Best from the Rest. And that's what we saw in 2020. Those organizations that were radically adaptable won. And we want to be able to aggregate that methodology in a single area and go forward with it. Now, I have to say this. We've been talking a lot about a lot of this BS for 20 damn years. Since when I was at Deloitte as the chief marketing officer of Deloitte, head of sales at Deloitte, I helped to incubate the change management, the re-engineering practice there. We've been talking about the future of work for many, many years, and it hasn't barely landed. It landed squarely in our laps this past year. In 2012, I went on a research path. Also, we spent about $2 million, mostly funded by Accenture and Cisco at the time, asking the question of what are the new people rules in an increasingly virtual world? What are the new people rules in an increasingly virtual world? We published probably about 15 blog studies in Harvard Business Review and in the harvardbusinessreview.org over a period of about 7 to 8 years on this topic. And nobody gave a damn back then. We've been talking about the transformation of work for 20 years, and this year it finally came to roost. My big concern is that we're going to come out of this and we're going to go back to old work ways. And I'm already seeing the promise of that happen too soon. By the way, again, John, I appreciate the nod of the head, the smiles. You're giving me the energy that I need. Thank you very much, brother. Is there anything coming in before I dive into the actual methodology?
No? So just a reminder to everyone, please put your questions out either on chat or the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring them along the way for Keith.
Yeah. Listen, there are very few data sets as robust as the one we've collected in the past year. Throw me whatever question. It might not come out in the actual methodology that I'm about to share with you, but please throw it out and allow me to dig into my memory of the conversations we were having for these best practices. All right, so let's talk about leadership. The big observation we made this past year was that leaders alone did not win. teams won. Teams won, not leaders. And you look at organizations that have a pride in an historical focus on leadership and leadership competencies. This past year, many of them awoke to the recognition that not just leadership competencies mattered, but team competencies. Now, the elements of a high-performing team is something that John and I and my partners have been studying for 20 years now. We started the firm to be a focus on high-impact teams and coaching high-impact teams, and we've been doing that for many years. For instance, Delta Airlines, we were coaching Delta Airlines coming into the pandemic, and we were coaching Delta Airlines and their executive team around the transformation of the travel industry. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and we were working on a quarterly basis with them, organizing the team to be what we call co-elevating, a team that is deeply committed to a mission, in this case, transforming the travel industry, but also committed to each other and committed to a set of attributes that won't let each other fail, that'll push each other, that'll hold each other accountable. The principle of co-elevation shifts from hub and spoke to a leader to the team having responsibility for each other. And this is what we saw in organizations, even ones where we weren't coaching. The team became a defining element. The team lifted each other's energy up. The team ignored boundaries and they just got stuff done. The team rose to the occasion and broke through innovative boundaries that they hadn't imagined before. Every one of our companies have stories of standing up new products in a record period of time, re-engineering entire ways of working in a record period of time. We did the unthinkable in ways that we would have never imagined in the past. But it was the team that did it, not the leader, not the leader. And we have been preaching this for a long time, but it became true this past year. And the other thing that was interesting about this, and we'll go into the detail and I'll walk you through the methodology, but we did it in a more humanistic way. We did it with more vulnerability. We did it with more compassion. We did it with a sense of that vulnerability. And that, I feel, is one of the great awakenings that a lot of people had this past year, which is, and I've talked to a lot of financial services institutions, very white shoe kind of organizations, where for the first time, the CEO, the male white shoe suit and tie CEO, teared in front of the organization, and the shift in credibility that person gained, the humanistic ownership of, yes, we are together in this, came out. So there are four attributes of dialing up, dialing down leadership that is crucial in a radically adaptable environment, and what we saw in this past year. I'll give you the four, and then I'll go back and I'll tease out some elements of each. And I hope so in a very prescriptive way that will help you become that quicker. Number one is collaborative. And I'm going to use the word collaborative and inclusive because I'm going to walk you through different stages of collaborative that really blew me away in our research. We're not just talking about some basic collaboration, which is the fallback when you can't get your own stuff done and you are forced to bring somebody else in because you can't get done what you want to get done without them. That's not collaboration. I'm talking about real co-creation where people leaned into each other and broke through solutions. I'm talking about the use of crowdsourcing for business planning. I'll come back to this, but the first bucket is collaboration and inclusion. The second bucket is agile. I might not spend that much time on this bucket, but I'll tell you this. There isn't an organization that didn't adopt agile during 2020. And they did it in what I call crisis agile. Most organizations might have had agile that existed in their technology group, might have had agile that existed in their project management group, but their executive teams were not using agile. This past year, executive teams went on 1 week agile sprints. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. You woke up on Monday knowing what you needed to do. You sprinted your butts off to achieve it on Monday through the week. And then you collapsed on Friday and you used the weekend to figure out what your next sprint was like. And that's basically what we were doing. And at the end of every Agile sprint, there was a deep curiosity and awareness of what was going on in the marketplace. There was deep curiosity in knowing that everything has changed, so nothing is assumed. Let's figure it out. Let's know what the next is without any assumptions of what has happened in the past. If things were risky or wrong, you wrestled these ideas to the ground with each other. You didn't pull punches. I'm probably again sharing a little bit too much just by going over the 4 at the high level, but the idea of Agile, you were in crisis Agile. Now take a company like Delta. They went from quarterly transformational sprints. How do we change the transformation industry to daily survival sprints, right? I mean, they woke up with 90% reduction of their revenue and on a daily basis figuring out, what are we doing today? And those stand-ups were daily sprints. Do not lose that Agile mindset. And in between, we used empowered teams. The idea that we weren't in each other's shorts, we weren't controlling everything, we weren't worrying about hierarchy and control. We were using empowered teams to get things done because we all had too many things to get done, and then we woke up and we reassessed at the end of the week. This is something you need to keep. Now, there's a wonderful book that came out over the pandemic year by Bain about Agile. It's probably one of the most in-depth books on Agile that you could imagine. If you want to go back and and read some of the stuff that Eric Ries wrote originally. But seriously, Agile is a mainstay of the operating system of the future. Every organization needs to begin to adopt Agile principles and Agile processes. Yes, sir.
Hey, Keith. So we actually have a question about Agile.
Please.
From Michael L. Do you see organizations continuing to stay Agile, or do you see the urgency go away and teams losing their willingness to continue to be Agile?
And that's my fear. And that's my fear. That's the spot on question. And the reason this research is so important to us right now is that I am seeing a slide back into old waterfall ways of working as an executive team. And we don't let our executive teams, when we coach an executive team, we put them on 1 month Agile sprints. And I'm going to suggest that everything that I'm talking about that you need to do with your team needs to go into 1 month Agile sprints. Now, if you've got a high velocity transformation business, when I'm coaching unicorn companies, we're on weekly to every other week sprints. When I'm coaching larger traditional companies, it's fine to go on a monthly sprint. If it's a really big company and it's on a broader subject like the transformation of the industry, we can go on quarterly sprints. But right now, monthly sprints to every other week. And what does that mean? That means you figure out what the 6 hills are that you're trying to take as a team, and that you have allocated those hills to individual Sherpas. And I say Sherpas, not leaders, because one of the most important things we learn is that the definition of a team, and this is actually an outgrowth of the research we had been doing for about 5 years that created the book that came out in May called Leading Without Authority. Leading Without Authority is a new organizational model. We're not talking about holacracy, but I'm talking about how do we lead in networks? We've been talking, my alma mater at Deloitte has been proving, and companies have been proving that we're working in networks today. We don't work in org charts, we work in networks. So if we work in networks, how do you work in networks? Well, you have to redefine what a team leader is. And a team leader is nothing more than a Sherpa of individuals in a network. So I have a goal. I have multiple goals that I'm responsible for. Each of those goals has a team of individuals, independent of whether they report to me is irrelevant. And those team of individuals have to go on weekly sprints to achieve our outcomes. And if I'm going to be a leader, I've got to enlist the teammanship of those individuals because they don't report to me necessarily. And that's where a lot of organizations have a lot of stickiness, and why disruption happens so easily with startups, because the founder culture doesn't give a damn about organization design. A founder culture just gets it done. When I'm working with some of the unicorn companies, some of them have upwards of 5 founders, and they all have jobs, but they don't give a damn. They are wrestling ideas to the ground. They are pushing each other. They are elevating each other. They're calling each other out. They're all respectful. They care about each other. They actually love each other, but they're pushing each other hard, and they don't care about boundaries. That's the way we need to work. And Leading Without Authority is the book that defines how do we actually practice this, and how do we work and design an organization that works in networks. So my answer is that we need to begin to work in agile teams. Every one of the 6 hills that a team is trying to take, I say 6 hills, that's an old, strategy deal where every time I bumped into a company that had just done a strategic plan, they always have 5 to 10 hills that they're trying to take, and they have red, yellow, green lights, many of which are just lying in terms of saying that they're green because they're still not getting the outcomes, because they're not operationalizing the real push. They're not operationalizing the real push into these weekly sprints. And then more importantly, we're going to talk about it in a moment, is the ability to land these weekly sprints with a contract among the team to really bulletproof and stress test each other. So a sprint owner or a sprint Sherpa doesn't own that thread of work independently. They show up in a stand-up with the whole team, and the whole team's job is to own the success, of each other's threads. 20% of our brains are focused not just on our own work, but on the team's collective success. My old friend Stanley McChrystal, and talking about team of teams and crossing the finish line together, that chopper doesn't take off. The chopper doesn't take off until every soldier's on the team, on the chopper. And so having this collectivism, or what I call co-elevation, is a social contract that I'm going to come back and talk about in the bucket called collaboration and inclusion. So we're now only on the second of the 4. We talked about collaboration and inclusion. We talked about agile. The third is resilience. There was a period of time when we had just been exhausted. And I have seen this in many executive teams who have been going through transformation for many years, but not as bad as we saw it, of course, in 2020. And so I wanted to try to crack that code. I knew that real volatility, which we live in anyway, we live in volatility all the time. Real volatility is going to fatigue, frustrate, maybe even fracture our workforce. And at the time, of course, we had the Black Lives Matter movement and the fractured conversations and the challenges and the fear. All of that was intermixed, and people were exhausted. And I reached out to Mindy Grossman at Weight Watchers and Cece, the new CEO at Headspace. And I said, can we fund some joint research around mental and physical well-being, and what is the role of a team and the role of leaders in resilience and keeping a resilient team? Now, mind you, the word resilience is often used and applied strategically to organizations that can stay strategically agile. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about individual resilience. And what I learned early on was that individual resilience was a subject that had not really had a good science associated with it. There's a lot of science around resilience, but not as it's applied to organizations. And particularly what we started to see in our research was that the greatest eroder of physical and emotional energy was actually not the diet, wasn't the sitting in your butt in the seat, it wasn't the lack of exercise, it wasn't even the stress of everything that was going on in politics and other things. It actually ended up being the number one predictor was how the team held each other's energy up. And so we started digging into this subject of team resilience. And I partnered with, in addition to the work there, I partnered with a company called Lee Hecht Harrison, who had been publishing training in the area of resilience, but not team resilience. And I started looking at other individuals who were in this space. Again, everybody was talking about individual resilience, but not team resilience. So we started to develop a methodology for what are the questions you would ask yourself. Is your team resilient? And I'll touch on it a little bit, but you can go into Harvard Business Review, hbr.org, and type Ferrazzi resilience, and you can get the article that we wrote. But the diagnostic had to do with whether or not the team had strong relationships, whether the team had humility and willingness to ask for help, whether the team had candor and willingness to have a voice in the room. These were the elements that created resilience. Now that resilience of the team cascaded into engagement and energy of the team and well-being, emotional and physical well-being as well. Not to say that we don't need programs for weight and for exercise and for meditation. We need all of those things. But I'm saying that the leader and the team contract that we own each other's energy is a new contract. And that also requires, again, back to the point before of vulnerability, it also requires the humility and the vulnerability that people are willing to share when they need help, which at the peak of the pandemic, we were. People were willing to break down and let people know that they were struggling. Even the leaders who in the past would have never thought that it was a part of their role to let people know that they were struggling. But because everybody was, it was important that leaders shared in that sense of humanity. So by the way, let me just give you a very simple practice around resilience. A very simple practice is when you're bringing, and this is the thing that John and I do, when we're coaching executive teams, we reboot your habits and rituals. And so what I'm going to give you is a few things that we call high return practices. A high return practice is a practice that you execute in your team, that if you execute it and it turns into a habit, you get a high return toward innovation, a sense of perceived candor in the room, et cetera. So we can show a correlative outcome behaviorally and outcome business-wise to the adoption of a distinct set of behaviors. So we call them high return practices. One of them is an energy check. At the beginning of your meeting, just literally ask people to type in their chat room, what is your energy today? 0 to 5. And you just let everybody type it in. And all of a sudden you see that Jane was a 2. Jane, is there anything you want to share today? I'd love to chat with you a little bit about that. If somebody is always a 4 and they're a 3 one day, then that's probably worthy of a quick question. But it doesn't take a lot of time. Now, John and I also facilitate some portion of a meeting where you dip into humanity. So we a practice called sweet and sour. What's going on in your life sweet? What's going on your life that's sour? Personal, professional check-in. What are you struggling with personally? What are you struggling with professionally? Adding that small dose of intimacy, vulnerability, and connection into a meeting accelerates psychological safety. It accelerates the willingness to take risks. It accelerates the connectivity of a team, the relationships of a team, and therefore you can lean on that to get the bolder behavioral attributes of candor, collaboration, challenge, et cetera, less defensive-ness, et cetera. So I put all that into the resilience bucket as a set of high return practices. I'm going to move now on to the fourth area of high performing teams, and it's the area called foresight. Very, very interesting. One of the biggest questions I had was, who foresaw the pandemic and acted on it? And the answer is relatively few. The number was less than 15%. Even in large organizations, sometimes only a particular area of the company that did react to it positively or predictively were present, whereas the whole company didn't. Lockheed Martin, the aerospace division, they had a process. And this is really a clever little thing that we discovered, and it ended up creating a whole chapter in the book. Strategic planning departments failed us in 2020. Many of them had detected, had the news, had the information, they knew what was going on, but we didn't act on it. I'm not going to say the names of the companies, but some of our clients had the briefings, had the news, and the week before March 13th, I was facilitating an agenda, and it wasn't even on the agenda, it wasn't even mentioned. So why is it then that Lockheed Martin went fully virtual in February? And the answer is that the teams that acted on foresight, acted on predictability and on the predictions, they had processes where not a strategic planning department or a planning organization separate from the actual executive team were responsible for risk identification and opportunity identification. It was infused in the team. Simple high return practice for you. Have a conversation with your executive team and have them identify what are the categories of risk and opportunity that we should be looking at and evaluating on what series of time, monthly, perhaps weekly, certainly quarterly, annually. And then you assign to individual members of your team, you have customer risk and opportunity, you have macroeconomic policy risk and opportunity, you have whatever it is. And you assign that technical risk, etc. You assign that to individuals and actually have a part of the meeting. And this is why Lockheed Aerospace, because they were so good at bulletproofing their own critical standards for space and space exploration, they had gotten into that habit. They're using it for all aspects of the business. They had dispersed detection into the fabric of the team, and they spent a little bit of time every month, 5 minutes, where everybody would go around and raise their hand if they had something that deserved the attention of the team. In that short period of time, 5 to 10 minutes, they would decide whether or not an assessment meeting needed to be created. And I also got a lot of insights from this from a few other outside faculty members. We created faculty while we were creating a lot of this. And I'll give you some of the names as we go through. Leo Tillman, particularly on this issue of forecasting. But they detected and then they determined whether or not assessment meeting was needed. And if assessment meeting was needed, then they determined whether or not scenario planning was needed. And in that case, the companies that did that integrated forecasting into their team meetings were able to avoid and actually some of the being caught flat-footed that so many other teams suffered from. So a very important process for you to think about. So all of these 4 areas, and I really want to come back and spend a lion's share of my time on the inclusion piece and the collaboration piece before I move on to the second half of the book. I got you, John. Before I move on to the second half of the research around workforce redesign, business model redesign, and purpose. But let me pause for a second. And John, is there any good questions coming in for the team?
Yeah, we have a few questions that have lined up now, Keith. So a couple of them on the cross-team opportunity, or what we refer to as teaming out.
Yeah.
The first of those is, what do you see the role of a manager when tasks need to be done by people who are crossing reporting lines? And the second, how do you incentivize the cross teams cooperation in a highly structured org, especially when there's a different compensation structure and incentives?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to go back to the book, Leading Without Authority. And I appreciate Scott's credit for that book. There's no question, my drop the mic moment in my life was having the honor to co-author the book, Never Eat Alone, with Tal Raz. And that book has, changed so many people's lives around the world relative to authentic relationships in their life and creation of opportunity and growth in what was called networking, but really is about relationship management. I think Leading Without Authority is an equally as powerful and important book as that. And I'm really excited about having gotten that into the marketplace. And people like Adam Grant and many of the people that I deeply respect, who are friends of mine, echo that. What we say in the case of a manager in an organization is, when somebody doesn't report to you, you need to earn the right to lead them. And I created a word, which is the role of a leader to open another individual to my agenda. And that word is opening porosity, porousness, like a sponge. This is porous, whereas this is not. So the question is, are the people that you're trying to get to do something porous to you? Well, the number one way in which to get another individual porous is co-creation. And we have an old model of collaboration, which is that of buy-in. Buy-in is bullshit. And buy-in is when you've cooked an answer and you're selling it to somebody, you're looking them to buy in. It's a very distinct model from co-creation. So when John and I are coaching teams, we're spending much more of our time helping the team realize that the team needs to bring questions to the table, not report outs. You're not reporting out and selling. Back in my day, in marketing at Starwood Hotels, if I had a new advertising campaign, I would politic my way in getting it pre-sold before I would bring it in front of the executive team, which was poor leadership. What I should have done, and what we mandate and encourage teams to do today, is early in the process bringing questions to the table so that I could fully understand the sales organization's need from this campaign. And yes, the key is when you bring questions to the table, you can't have the leader or the team hijack their authority to move the project forward. But we have to make sure that everyone's voices are heard. It's a delicate coaching march that you need to do for each other to make sure that the room is used as a safe way to get most inclusive dialogue possible. So opening porosity is a process that we have to lead with. And part of the way you open porousness of another individual is to invite them in to co-creation. If I have a team, if I'm a manager and I have a team of other individuals who don't report to me, the first person I invite into my team, I'm inviting them into their team. The first person I invite into my team, I'm inviting them into their team. Now, then there's another chapter in the book called Serve, Share, and Care, which how do you go about really emotionally connecting with somebody? How do you make sure that they understand that your joint initiative is serving them? How do you make sure that you share vulnerably and authentically so that there's a loyal connection and they'll cut you a break in the process of having this dialogue with them, where their incentive program may be aligned or misaligned, but they're going to work with you curiously to come up with a solution. That comes from personal relationship. There is no question that personal relationship serves an important element of getting work done today. We've got to make sure that it's a part of your capacity as a leader to generate those personal relationships that give permission to be heard, give permission to co-create, serve, share, and care. Enough about the other individuals. So that's the basis of the methodology at Leading Without Authority that I think would benefit you if you want to look into and teaching your managers how to lead without authority. It's a pretty straightforward methodology. Let me go on. George, please, more questions would be great.
We actually have questions lining up now. So
and I'm only halfway through the study, but good. Yeah.
So I'm gonna bring these two together because they actually refer to bringing these methodologies more into, let's say, old school companies. The first of them is, do you have any tips for applying agile philosophies or more traditionally entrepreneurial business practices to older, perhaps slower moving industries, for example, healthcare? And a related question is that a lot of this feels like it's about tech companies. What are some old school companies that are adopting well, and how are they doing so?
Well, like I said, General Motors is such a great example, I'm also currently working with the CVS organization as they are integrating Aetna and CVS and really transforming healthcare as we know it. But let me also challenge you here a bit. You seem to be making a distinction between old school manufacturing and industrial companies and tech companies. And I'm gonna channel for a moment my dear best friend Peter Diamandis, who basically says if your company is not an AI business, it's out of business. And all of these companies that I'm working with that are traditional old school companies have awoken to recognize that their disruption. I mean, if you're General Motors and you have an expertise in manufacturing, in traditional industrial manufacturing, and your distribution channel is through the dealership community and the marketing is traditional marketing, and you are now waking up to sell against not just Tesla, of course, it's a software firm, it's a fundamentally different engine and distribution channel, et cetera. But now you're selling against Google and Amazon in the self-driving car world. What does that look like to you, right? So the disruption that all of you are imminently poised to have biting at your butt has to do with not thinking of yourself as an old school company, but instead thinking of yourself as a technology company. And I'll add one more example of that. Jeff Wilke, who was the former CEO of Amazon Retail, who recently left as Andy Jassy moved up into Jeff Bezos's job. It used to be that Andy running AWS and Jeff Wilke would run the retail section. Jeff Wilke retired and went on. What is he doing? He's leading a major company, PE, but also just a company that is focused on the reawakening and reimagining of manufacturing, as you know, but with leading with material sciences, AI, machine learning, robotics, etc. And my challenge with you is that most large organizations think that their tech debt is so deep that they can't reinvent. But I know people like Jim Fitterling at Dow is not thinking this way. James Collins at DuPont, two people that I know very well in old school companies, are not thinking this way. So just the basic question I would draw into question. But the answer is all of these companies have to be thinking this way. And relative to Agile, the simplest answer to your question is start with projects. Start with projects. Find a project that's so important that somebody that you can influence can adopt Agile principles, any project. And then use the project as a mechanism to adopt Agile. Use the project as a mechanism to adopt leading without authority and working in networks. Use the project to show success, show accelerated success, show elevated innovation, show a more joyful and engaged, inclusive workforce. And I want to add one other thing on this inclusion piece. The chapter in the book, and again, you can actually go online and I think you can pre-order the book now, which I'm very excited about. Thank you very much, Melinda from Harvard Business School Press. The book, again, is called Competing in the New Work World, which is everything that I'm talking about right now in one book around what have we learned from leading in a radically volatile year that allows 20 years of the future of work to come into a methodology called radical adaptability. Go order it. And if you do order it, I don't know, send me an email and I'll make sure that you get a copy of the galley even before the book comes out. So that's a promise to anybody from Harvard. If you go online, actually, the other thing that I would say is, given the time that we have, I'm not going to get time. I'm looking at the time right now. It's 10 of. I'm not going to get time to finish all the work around the recontracting of a high-performing team and how a team can be radically collaborative, inclusive. Go to coelevation.com. And there's two things there that I think you'll really enjoy as a follow-up to this conversation. One of them is a 8-question diagnostic tool of whether your team is this kind of a co-elevating team. And it's everything's free. So please go on, download the diagnostic tool. The second thing that's there is a white paper that I'm getting in a lot of trouble for, which I'm really excited about. And it's a white paper focused on how the studies that have come out of Oxford and another institution in the Northeast that I love and won't name, but studies that have come out of great institutions claiming that innovation in a remote world has been tampered versus physical collaboration and the innovation that's possible in physical collaboration. Here's the bottom line. It's wrong-headed and it's wrong. And here's why. The data set that these academics are looking at is a data set of a bunch of people who have used remote and virtual work, but didn't use it to its highest high return practices. They were using virtual and remote work well. If you took out the Drew Houstons, who used asynchronous collaboration as a primary form of collaboration, if you took out the General Motors that had adopted these high return practices of remote teams and using collaborative problem solving and bulletproofing and breakout rooms, and if you took out the organizations that were using companies like Mural and others for whiteboarding, if you took out and using good communications tools like Slack and others, if you took out the companies that were using these tools well, you would find that they had disproportionately higher and better innovation than the others who did not. So the fact is that people were the biggest challenge we have is we are competing against the fact that we think we're proud that we did well in a remote world this past year. We did not. We did mediocre. We barely used the tools effectively. And as a result, we got through, and we're proud that we did, but we didn't maximize them. And now we're running back to old work ways. And Jamie Dimon, I one of the greatest respect I have for any leaders in the world, but I was very disappointed when his call for going back to the workplace. Perhaps there's other reasons for it, and I haven't read it all, but I read some things, and I read that part of it is that this lack of innovation possibility that you only get in a physical world. And the reality is that's not true. It's just not true. But whereas I saw companies like Merrill Lynch apply the remote and virtual tools to actually create an entire level of collaboration and coaching where the financial advisors coached each other through the pandemic using remote and virtual tools and radically accelerated the net new accounts through that kind of coaching. If you use the tools right, you'll get better outcomes. If you don't, you won't. And as a result, we're suffering to run back into the workplace with wrong-headed means. Anyway, all of that is nothing more than an advertisement for this paper that I wrote that a lot of people are pissed off about. So please go and take a look at it on coelevation.com. And I forget what the paper is called, but it'll be very clear that it's up there. John, I've got 10 more minutes, and I haven't even gotten to the second half of the conversation.
So two things. You did just respond to one question that was out there that I was going to offer you to close on, which is, what are your thoughts on embracing asynchronous communication? And so again, to your invitation, go out to coelevation.com and take a look at the white paper that you addressed that. I think. Yeah,
the white paper has two components to it. Well, three. First, it says the data out there is wrong and it's not being analyzed correctly. The second thing it says is, here are the high return practices to use remote teams better. And then the third piece of the white paper is, how do you use asynchronous collaboration to reduce your meetings, the number of meetings you have, by 30%, and increase the collaboration by having collaboration without meetings.
And then Keith, I know that Harvard is near and dear to your heart, but we also have part of our audience from MIT, and we want to extend the invitation to go out to co-elevation.
I mean, that's Peter Diamandis's Peter Diamandis's alma mater, and I do believe that this is actually originated through MIT, wasn't it? So I should be tipping my hat to MIT first and foremost. Yes. Right down the hallway from us for all my 2 years of fun there.
We still have a few outstanding questions, but do you want to just wrap this up for everyone?
No, I don't. Here's what I would say very simply. If the biggest focus you should focus on is becoming one of the highest performing teams that have adopted new age practices of radical collaboration, real agility, ownership of each other's resilience and energy, and looking around corners in a regimented fashion with that kind of foresight. If you do that and you recontract with your team, you will naturally redefine your business model. You couldn't get away from it. If you're doing the right kind of foresight exercises, you will see the technological interruptions that are coming down that you need to reinvent around, and you will reinvent your business model, just like companies like General Motors are, and Prudential even. I heard some really great stories from Prudential recently. And the second thing you will do is you will naturally reinvent your workforce model. I mean, a little company like ours has just gone global. I could not be happier. Our director of marketing, we just hired her from the Philippines. I'm paying her 50% more than she was ever paid before. And I'm paying 30% more than if I hired somebody out of Los Angeles, where I live, or New York. And I have to say that she is extraordinary. And we've hired administrative assistants all over the world. We've hired project managers all over the world. We're a truly global company today, and we can afford much more human capital in our organization than we ever were before. Workforce redesign is much more than we're just thinking about around remote work. We actually, in the book, we have 6 dials of workforce redesign that you can explore. And then finally, purpose. Hubert Joly, an old dear friend, he just came out with a book on really the importance of purpose and his story at Best Buy and how his turnaround there. was grounded in a foundation of values and purpose. And it's a wonderful book. And he's an amazing leader with a great case study and turnaround story. But it's time for us to relook at these and dust them off and use them. I want to use this as a segue to a dear friend of mine who passed away during the pandemic, Tony Shea. Tony was an investor of mine. He was a business partner of mine. He and I used to throw a dinner at the TED conference every year. And what I would do when I would sit down with Tony every year is he would blow my mind with different ways of thinking. Some of it was radically innovating on the edge, like holacracy. Some of it was just what one might think of as wrongheaded originally, because he was investing so much in creating loyalty on a call in a call center, whereas everybody else was trying to get on and get off with maximum efficiency, right? And here he was truly leaning in and creating loyalty through a call center with Zappos. I would always walk away from him inspired. He was one of the great thinkers of the new future of human capital. He believed fundamentally that human elevation was possible in every single one of us, and a leader's job was to create the greenhouse that all of us could grow effectively. Well, with his passing, a group of us have come together and we've created an award, and it's called the Tony Shea Award. And in the month of June, this month, please go to the TonySheaAward.com. Maybe John, you could post it, please. Post the TonySheaAward.com and post coelevation.com. Make sure the links work for everybody in chat. And what I would love for you to do is, if you're a leader that's doing something clever around innovating on human capital, if you're a team that is proud of what you're doing with human capital, if you're an organization that is proud, I want you to go and apply. It's a simple application. But we're going to announce at TED conference this award. And this person or set of individuals who apply are going to get to walk in the shoes and in the halls of the places that Tony walked and continue to inspire us like Tony did. So I would highly, highly encourage any of you, if you work for an organization you're proud of, if you work for a boss that you're proud of, please go on there and at least let us know that you're interested in applying, and we'll help you apply. This will be the first cycle for the award, and I'll be working with Scott at Inc. as well to call out to his community for this award. But what would be great about it is, just like I'm saying, your executive teams need to constantly ask the question, how do we elevate and how do we go higher? I want you to be inspired like Tony did, to constantly elevate, constantly go higher, and really to co-elevate with your team, to reinvent your business models, reinvent the way you think about your workforce, and make sure that you're fulfilling that purpose in extraordinary ways. Thank you all for having me. I'm grateful and I'm humbled. Such great institutions that have shown up here today, like of course MIT for hosting us, and Harvard, and I saw Cornell and a few others. Maybe there's a few Yaleys from my undergraduate alma mater. But whoever you are out there, I hope that this is hopeful, impactful, and maybe a little bit of entertaining. John, thanks so much for being in my right chair there.
Yep, absolutely. Happy to be here. Thank you, everyone. The two links that Keith mentioned are in chat. And gang, thank you so much for hosting us today. Bye, everyone.